People come to us for all types of stuff. People talk to us anything from dating ideas and help, and people want to talk finances of their own. Just want to have ideas and advice. And Rabbi is a great place. If you don't have this person you can talk to, you should find somebody. This is to anyone listening to this podcast. If you don't have somebody you can talk to, you have questions, whether it's just to be a sounding board in life. If you have a significant other, usually that a person can help, but you need to have somebody kind of like a mentor, kind of friend that you can talk to.
Welcome back to Curiosity Class, the podcast where we break down complex topics into easy to understand ideas and bite-sized pieces. My name is Jeff Album, and I've been a curious person my entire life. Inspired by Albert Einstein's quote, "If you can't explain something simply, you don't understand it well enough," we aim to make learning accessible and engaging. On this show, we're going to bring you experts from various fields, ranging from personal finance to physics, to help you understand everything from 401ks to how airplanes fly. So let's dive in and satisfy our curiosity together. Welcome back to another episode of Curiosity Class, everybody. I am joined today. This is a special one. I am joined by my good friend, mentor, spiritual advisor, and counselor, and the main reason, the tipping point for why I ended up moving to Austin. That I think I've told you that story a million times, but I'll tell it again later. Rabbi Mendy Levertov, thank you so much for being here. What's going on?
Thank you for having me. This is very exciting.
Very. Okay, so I have to tell the story very quickly of
Go ahead.
You being the tipping point of why I moved to Austin. So I was debating moving to Austin. I came and visited in September, which is like the worst month to come visit Austin because it's hot, it's humid, it's sweaty. And I was on the fence, and I went back to the Bay Area, and I was thinking about it and thinking about it and considering. And I FaceTimed you. And at that time, I think you only had 5 kids. So you were, way less chaotic. And FaceTiming me, and I was laughing. You were coming up with these, you were like, yeah, Torah is the original blockchain, whatever. Like Austin's like Tesla meets Cowboys. And I was in tears, crying of laughter. And I was like, all right, if you're the rabbi, I'm in. I'm into that.
It was great. I remember that FaceTime because I think it was right. It was like, okay, Texas version of COVID was towards the end of Texas COVID.
Right.
Which means it was like end of the summer of 20 or maybe early 21. It was like Austin had already started opening up again.
Yeah.
And then there was an influx of people that were running to escape everywhere else. And you called and you're like, I'm thinking of coming and da-da-da. I'm just like, crazy California, because you also had your hair at the time.
Yeah, at the man.
And it was like, I was just like, crazy California, dude, let's go. Let's do this. That was it. It was great.
It was great. It was great. So thank you for being the thing that pushed me over the edge. Obviously a great decision. I was super happy to have you on because the title of today is going to be something like Judaism 101 or Intro to Judaism. And I figured you'd be a fantastic person. You might know something about that.
A little bit, maybe.
So can you, for those not watching, he's pointing to this immense library behind him. How many times have you read all of those books?
0. I've read many of them. Let's be honest. I've read many of them, a little bit of many of them, and I've read some of them multiple times.
Okay.
And then a lot of them I have. I don't know if you've ever read Black Swan from Nissim Taleb.
Mm-mm.
It's a very interesting book about how basically it's a finance book. How you can't predict, the things you can't predict are the things that are the most important. So basically there was this famous thing, the name of the book is called Black Swan because it's a famous thing that everyone knew there was no such thing as a black swan, right? Everyone knew there was the only such thing as a white swan. It was the only thing no one could even fathom that there was. And then one day somebody traveled to Australia, and in Australia they have black swans. And suddenly it's like, you can never imagine it, and suddenly it exists. And his point basically is that when you basically short the markets, that's his general theory, short all the markets all the time because no one can fathom that it's happening. And so you're probably going to be able to make a killing when it does happen. The problem is you can never know when it's going to happen because it's a black swan. And so you hemorrhage money for years, and then something happens and you're proven right. Does it break even? Does it not? Separate conversation. I think he made a lot of money by the recession. The Great Recession. And I think that he almost made money. I don't remember if he made money in COVID because he was like, it was something funny about that.
Okay.
But that's his theory is a black swan. So he has this beautiful concept he talks about is having the library, your massive library to remind you how much you don't know. To keep you humble. That. Yeah, it keeps you humble and you realize how much there is that you've left to read. So a lot of these books are reference books, and this is only a small piece. I would mess with my setup if I rotated it. I made a calculation once. I don't remember what the number was. It was over 3,000 books.
Wow.
And that's my personal limit. And I know for a fact that the purpose of this, a lot of it is reference books. A lot of it is books that I'm going to read. I'm going to check things up. And once in a while, I have a question. Somebody asks me, I'm like, thank you, because that's a book that I'll never open otherwise. Right? But a lot of it also is because I want to have the book to remind me that there's something else that I still want to read. I bought a Zohar 2-3 years ago. Again, it's like 21 and 21. I bought a Zohar. Why did I buy a Zohar? Because I'm like, I have to own a Zohar. How can I not own a Zohar? And then the question, will I ever read the entire Zohar? I don't know. Who knows?
Right.
Well, definitely feasible that it will read big parts of it. And I definitely need to reference it. So that's why I had to slap.
Right. Oh, I love that. I love that. All right, so we can start in 1,000 different ways, but I'm going to start with the kind of a simple question to kick us off. What is Judaism? How do you define Judaism? If someone comes to you and they said, Rabbi, I was born Jewish, I've never touched it before, I'm thinking about learning more about it. What is it? What's going on with this?
Okay. It really depends on the person, by the way. This is a question that I tailor to the human experience of the person in front of me. Because Judaism is so complex and so multi-layered that you can really approach, it's like a challah brain. You can come in from any direction that you want,
right,
and kind of experience it in your own way. So for starters, Judaism is a combination of is it a race? It's not a race. Is it a religion? It's not only a religion. Is it culturalism? It's also culturalism. It is it? Yes. Is it culturalism? What am I? Because I had a question for me. Is it culturalism? Also, right? And at the minute you start saying it's not any of these things, people will freak out, because people are everyone has their own personal. Again, this is people who are deeply involved in Judaism. They all have their own interpretation of what Judaism is, and at the minute you start saying this is what it is, this is what it's not, they get very nervous. Okay, So that's first of all, it's a combination of all these things. But the way that I look at it, kind of from the core, Judaism is a spiritual way of life with which we spiritualize the world.
Okay, so define that. Like, break that down.
Very good.
In more simpler terms.
Very good.
What is spirituality? What does that mean?
What is everything? So we understand that Jewish people are a nation that was chosen, spoken to by God at Mount Sinai. This is 3,000 years ago, and God spoke to the Jewish people, saying, "I'm putting you in charge of a mission that is going to spread, is going to cover all times, it's going to cover all spaces, and it's going to cover all people. And what you're going to do is you're going to be the torchbearers, a light into the nations," as Isaiah says. We torchbearers to show the world, not that you should do it and the rest of the world should watch, but rather you're going to be the example, and you're going to be the ones who kind of bring the vibe to the nations that are going to be, they're going to connect to God. What does it mean connect to God? So what is spirituality? What is godliness? We understand that there's the same way that a human, let's go from easy inside out, humans are easier to understand than the cosmos sometimes. Each of us, we believe, has a soul. That soul is the part of you that makes you who you are.
Okay. And
where do you see that most? You see it when people go through, God forbid, physical disformity, or people go through massive weight changes, or, it's just an example, body physically changes a ton. God forbid someone gets into a car accident. God forbid somebody gets paralyzed. Or even it's going on a different direction, more morbid direction. People get into Alzheimer's and they have memory stuff. We begin to realize in all of these experiences that the person who you love, the person who you know, isn't the body. That's very clear.
Right.
It might be that it expressed through the body. They have hands. Can they move the hands? Can they move the feet? It might even be expressed in kind of the way that their brain kind of functions within the world. Do they have memory? Do they recognize who you are? They don't. But who is the person at their core? There's something deeply inside that human being that is somehow something beyond, something different. What is that something? We call that the soul. What is the soul? It is a divine energy that is you. And to make it more explicit, it is a part of God. God is the only living thing in the universe, the true living thing. Everything else that lives is spawning off from God's living. We borrow living this life from God. This is one of the reasons why there's a big discussion in spiritual and in Jewish communities. Is it possible that there are there's life on other planets? Right? On the one hand, you say, of course, there could be life because God can't be limited. On the other hand, we say that it doesn't make sense that there's another place in the universe that has life like we have, because we got the Torah. It's complicated. It gets very complicated.
Interesting.
But life itself comes from God, and that is your soul. So your piece of God inside of you is your soul.
Okay.
Now, as I said, we're going to start from the inside out. So again, we've discussed the soul. God is the soul of the universe. In the same way that you can sense inside the body that there's something as an identity and a personality that is, we all know it sits in the brain. It's in the brain. But at the end of the day, you sense that there's something deeper than just chemical reactions inside the brain. Especially in people that have mental, either whether it is natural mental challenges when they're born, special, children with special needs, special capacities, or if somebody's going through kind of like I said, an Alzheimer's or some sort of a memory issue. You see, there's a core human being at the core of everything. That is the soul that is beyond anything with the physical, even the chemical synapses that happen in the brain.
So
then go ahead.
So I guess I'm going to summarize it to make sure I'm understanding it correctly. So so Judaism believes that there's this, like, starting from the inside out, every human has a soul, and that soul is basically a piece of God. So there's a piece of God in every living human, and that is part of the divine, part of the godliness of the world. And so if you now expand out to the world, that God is the soul of the universe. So there's something in the universe and something in that is divine, that is God. So I guess does that mean that because obviously you're not a human, like when you die, I'm assuming the soul, like what does Judaism believe happens when you die? The soul leaves the body?
The soul leaves the body. The soul continues on. The soul is infinite.
The soul continues on, but like you don't need, like, you need your body in order to have a relationship with someone. You need a physical manifestation not to have a relationship with someone, but to, like, there's a difference between speaking to someone who's passed away and speaking to a friend who's living, right?
Correct.
How does that, like, what does the body play any role? Is there any, like, what is that role?
What a body can talk to a body,
right?
Soul can talk to a soul. Because we are primarily body individuals, we're people that live in bodies. Our experience is best captured as a body. Just because the physical world is physical, and therefore when you say I, right? 50% of the time you're saying I, Jeff, the body, and sometimes you're saying 50% you're saying I, Jeff, the soul. In your most elevated moments, in your most holy moments, in the most times you're most deeply with your friend, your family, your friends, with God, then you're talking about your soul. But there are times when you say, I'm hungry. Right? That's not your soul. It's your body. Right. Now, if you want, I can give you a whole interpretation how your soul is also hungry, because your soul also, and this is a big part of this, the soul wants to elevate the world, so the soul's hungry as well. Fine. But pragmatically speaking, if you're hungry, it's because your body's hungry and you're starving, or if you're tired, or if you're cranky. A lot of the physical, we would call this in the animal soul, kind of the physical energy drive of the body is going to be your body.
Okay.
You can talk to the souls. Souls can't communicate with us because imagine our headphones are in the wrong frequency.
Okay.
So our headphones are tuned in they're omnidirectional, not omnidirectional, they're single directional, whatever it's called. They're single channel. They can only listen to other bodies because that's just the way it is. All bodies are body and soul. When, God forbid, somebody passes away, the soul has been freed. The soul can experience both spirituality and physicality. Physicality is further from the soul. It's a little bit more difficult, but it can experience it also. But we have the soul in mind. We do things for the soul. Jewish tradition teaches us that if you study in memory of the soul, or if you give charity in memory of the soul, by doing good deeds, you're elevating. You're giving that soul something special.
So the deceased, the soul of the deceased person, if you do something, a good deed in that soul's honor. So what does it mean elevating? What does it mean going up?
Okay, so you have to ask a different question. Your question now is, So this is a question. Do you want to go in this direction? What does it mean, directionality in spirituality? Right?
Yeah. What does that mean?
Okay. So the first question is, okay, so there's a lot of things. Okay, this is a very important lesson in general when it comes to mystical conversation. One of the biggest difficulties when it comes to understanding mysticism is that the language is going to be something which we understand. I guess for bodies primarily.
Wait, hang on. So when you say mysticism, is that the same as spirituality? What?
Yes, mystical usually means more secret, and spiritual it means the inner essence of the world. It's kind of related.
Okay.
So I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example of something which is not spiritual and not mystical, but people think it is.
Okay.
Is like radio waves. Like you can't see it, so it must be spiritual, right? It's not, right? They're just not visible. Doesn't make it spiritual. They're of this world. They're part of this world. Spiritual is something of the spirit. It's something a little beyond. And even things like the forces that create the world, that give the world kind of its direction, like gravity, like the strong force and the weak force that exists within the molecules, and the quarks and the sun, whatever, quantum particles. All of these things are all physical.
Okay.
The first thing that I think we could speak to as being spiritual is probably emotion. Emotion, yeah. Emotion is spiritual. It is the very, very lowest kind of level of spirituality, but it already begins. For example, if I were to ask you, do you love your family?
Yeah.
Yeah. Where does that love live? Where does it sit?
In my body. Like, I feel it in my body. I don't know where it lives.
Sometimes, first of all, sometimes. Because what if you don't feel it in your body? You don't have love. Or you just crazy.
Right.
Right? Doesn't mean it's the same thing. If it actually lived in your body, and only in your body, then there could be an argument made that when you don't feel it in your body, you don't have love.
Right. And it's also interesting you asked the question, where does it live? Not where do I feel it?
Yeah. Right, because where you feel it is a manifestation.
Right.
Right? And then if you're going to get into complicated questions, you're going to go, actually love sits in the brain because that's where you think of it. Maybe, but I think that's just a manifestation of what love, where love kind of sits, or where kind of is experienced.
I guess I would say it lives in my soul.
Yeah.
But that's not a physical manifestation. Because it's just in me, right?
Where's your soul?
I don't know. Somewhere in me.
Yeah. So I think it's not in you. It's there in the spiritual. I'll give you another example, which is one, according to Jewish mysticism, it's one level higher, is thought processes, thinking, or ideas. Right? When you have an idea, just an example, a basic example. There's like physics types of questions. Let's do even 2 + 2 is 4.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Or even let's go to, everyone likes to quote it, Einstein's E = mc².
Mm-hmm.
Right? So where does that live? Where does it sit?
It's in my mind.
So it sits in your mind. Where does it sit?
In my mind? Like, where is my
mind? No,
mind?
it sits in the world. It sits in the world. So I can teach it to you, and you can figure it out. And if we were to write it down and we both die, it still exists. It's still true.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And sometimes it's ideas of discoveries, and sometimes it's ideas of thought processes. For example, communism and socialism and capitalism. Right? Mm-hmm. These are ideas on how the world should run, how finances should run, how a country should run. These are great ideas, incredible ideas. And of course, you can debate which one's better, which one's worse. That's part of the fun. But the idea is that there are ideas on how to run a society, how to function a society. And where do they live? Someone invented it, even better. Not discovered, because discovery is a little more like maybe it's just there, always. Someone invented a new way of living in the world.
Right.
Called it capitalism. It's not that old.
Right.
Okay? And now, if everyone were to die, if all of humanity were to be nuked out, and we wrote it down somewhere, does that idea still exist? Sure.
Yeah.
Where does it exist? It's not in the brains.
Oh, it's interesting. I guess I initially went to, it does exist, because you might have someone who thinks about it, but if no one's, it's kind of like if a tree falls in the forest, does it make a sound?
Correct.
That's what it reminds me of.
If everyone's dead.
Right. I don't know.
Of course it exists. And in fact, you can write it down. Or you could say that it's not discovered. It's always there.
Can I challenge that though? Because if
Sure.
we said that, like capitalism, for example, let's use that. It was invented, right? Like it didn't exist. It was invented by someone, brought into existence. Everyone is nuked. That there's no humans. How do you know it just wouldn't be invented again? Like then you're
It would be
implying that
invented again.
that it exists, so you're discovering it. So then all inventions are just discoveries of things that have
Yes.
already always existed.
In a certain sense, yes.
Okay.
All inventions are drawing out ideas from the essence or from the core kind of way of thinking of the world.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. So then, why is Judaism considered the same thing? Is Judaism an invention, or has Judaism always existed?
So let's go. So now, Judaism actually is something which is revealed to us. By the way, I think I've told this to you before, and I think I'll tell it to you again. Judaism. Before we get to Judaism, there are 3 types of wisdom in the world.
Okay.
Okay. There's wisdom. Hear background noise.
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay. There's 3 types of wisdom in the world. There's wisdom which is empirical, discovered evidence, right? Someone in a lab figured it out. There's Judaism's wisdom, which is revealed from God. We'll discuss what that means in a moment.
Okay.
And then there's wisdom that is whispered on a podcast. And everyone knows that wisdom whispered on a podcast is the most powerful wisdom. Did you know? Did you know? I'll tell you a secret. Nobody knows this.
Oh my god. Okay. All right. So start
Okay,
the
so
first
Judaism is revealed. So Judaism is revealed. That's what it is. It's revealed wisdom from God. What do you mean it's revealed wisdom from God? What does it even mean? So Judaism is a tradition, is a wisdom that is based on this is what we discussed on our video call many years ago. Judaism is a blockchain. It's the original blockchain. Judaism it is. I knew you'd love it, but it's true. It's true. What can we do? Judaism is the original blockchain. Judaism is the original wisdom that was passed down, transaction or kind of recorded transfer to recorded transfer for generations. What do I mean by that? When God revealed himself to Moses on Mount Sinai, God did so in the presence of all the Jewish people. This is very unique to Judaism. It is very unique to all spiritual traditions. Other spiritual, and not
explain what you mean by all people, because I think that gets misconstrued.
Good. So I'm going to explain. Not to disparage anyone else, obviously, God forbid, but to explain. Other religions are based on revelation to a single individual.
Right.
That someone, had a mystical experience, maybe once, maybe multiple times. They experience a revelation from God. They come back to the people and say, God spoke to me and told me X, Y, and Z. And then they have miracles and they have things to back that up.
Right.
But the core conversation that they had with God, no one really knows what went on. And so there's 2 problems. Number one, how do you know they're not lying? Again, we're not trying to disparage anyone, but who says they're lying? Maybe they're lying.
Right.
Maybe they had a mushroom trip, and then now they experienced kind of the divine speaking to them. I think most people today who went on some sort of mushroom trip feel the same way. You have a little bit of psilocybin, and suddenly you feel the universe is talking to you.
Right.
And maybe it is. Who knows? I don't know. I'm not going to judge those. And I'm not going to judge the people for their experiences. My point is that you don't know. I don't know if God spoke to you. You say God spoke to you. Good. So if God spoke to you and said, never wear shoes again in your life, I think it's a wonderful thing. Don't ever wear shoes again. I'm going to continue wearing shoes.
Okay.
And even if God told you nobody else should wear shoes, I'm probably not going to go along with that. It's cold, it's wet, and
right.
Good for you.
Okay.
Other religions have that. Judaism is different. Everyone thinks that God and Moses' relationship is similar to everybody else's relationship.
Right.
It's different. God did speak to Moses at the burning bush. Everyone knows that. It's in Exodus. Everyone experienced very good. And then God basically brings the Jews out of Egypt and brings them to Mount Sinai. At Mount Sinai, there's a massive difference. And suddenly, God tells Moses, I want to talk to all the people. I'm going to give everyone the basics of our tradition. To the point that when God is about to give the Torah and give the revelation on Mount Sinai, God actually tells Moses, go down. And Moses says, why? And God says, make sure they know what I told them yesterday. And Moses says, but they know. I told them what they said yesterday. And God says, yeah, but you should probably make sure. And so Moses goes down the mountain, and then when Moses is on the way back up, the Jews can still see him. that's when the giving of the Torah starts. So the Jews can see that it's not Moses talking.
Interesting.
They know for a fact that it's not like he had a megaphone on top of the mountain talking to them. They see Moses and they experience the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai. And what they experience is not just God talking to them. They experience, I guess, the ultimate psychedelic experience.
Right.
They experience synesthesia, where light and sound transfer places in the mind. Right? You experience, you see sound and you hear colors.
Right.
And they speak, God has a revelation. It is the most powerful prophetic revelation ever for all of humanity, and every single Jew experienced it at the same time.
So, right. Okay. So the whole basis of this is that every Jew experienced it, but like, and we've talked about this before, but like, I don't remember that. Like, I don't remember being there. So, or my soul doesn't remember being there. Like,
that's fair. That's fair. So now, from that point forward, so in other words, that in and of itself as an event has a massive level of inner congruence. It understands itself, right? We have this event that if it happened yesterday, there'd be no question that we'd be able to understand that God spoke to Moses. Now,
right.
Like all other things that exist in history, the further back we go, the less we have documented physically, right? We don't have writings necessarily, but we always have a chain of tradition that happened. As an example, one of the examples, how did the Civil War happen? So we know the Civil War happened because it's written about in textbooks. But all the stories of the Civil War, and all the reality of the Civil War, we know because we speak to people who spoke to people, but now we're like 2 or 3 generations away. Mm-hmm. But I've met people who were alive in the Civil War. Mm-hmm. Right? And so the narrative of the Civil War, the story of the Civil War, why happened, what happened. So now that we're a few generations away, there's kind of arguments. Again, this is kind of dicey politically, but it's like, what started it? What exactly triggered it? Was it this? Was this the reason? Was the state sovereign? All the different questions that exist today about that issue. And I think most people don't actually argue about that. Everyone agrees on kind of the main issues. But we all know about the Civil War, also because it's written in text, but also because we know people who know people who didn't.
Right.
Judaism.
But can't, like, if you're going back, because this, in, like, when did Mount Sinai happen in terms of thousands of years ago?
3,335 years ago. We know exactly how many years.
Okay, so 3,335 years ago. You can find something 100 years ago that has been told in tradition, but it's like, it's lost, right? Or it's distorted, or it's a huge game of telephone, right? So 3,335 years ago is a long time. What's the, like, why is it so sure that this is what happened?
So I think there's 2 important things to keep in mind. Number 1 is the amount of people that were involved, right? The recorded number in the Torah, in the Bible, is 600,000 fighting age men, which means between the ages of 20 and 60.
600, okay.
So there's a fighting age men. The army was 600,000, all eligible fighting males, which add to them the women, of course, and add their children, add their parents, etc. So it was quite a community. At minimum, it was like 3 million. I mean, if you go by depending on how many kids each person had, essentially. So not only do you have the time, the amount of people there, also the importance of this. This is the fundamental core. What is it called? Core memory. This is the core memory of the Jewish people. This is what creates the religion. Were it not for this, there's no Judaism.
Okay.
And again, people argue today, like, oh, Judaism is cultures and its values and it's this thing, and it's like this collective narrative that we kind of came together. I don't believe that. I think that the culture and everything else is nice and beautiful. I think the culture adds a lot of flavor and a lot of coloring and a lot of the things that the listeners to this podcast are going to recognize. Star of David, the Israeli flag, challah as being a Jewish food, the fact
lox and bagels,
the fact that Jews like to control the weather, like all these things that are. But a lot of these things, a lot of the stuff are really cultural. A lot of this are cultural. Right. Some of it came from more recent past, further past. Even the languages Jews speak: Ladino for Sephardic Jews that came from Spain; Yiddish for Jews that came from Eastern Europe. All of these things are additions, and I think it's a big part of what makes Judaism so beautiful is that we have layers of tradition. Mm-hmm. We have so many layers of tradition that we can trace back each thing where it came from, when it started. One of the things that I really enjoy doing when I study Torah. And when I say study the Torah, I don't just mean the Bible itself, and I mean all the books and all the layers and layers of tradition that come from it, is that you can go back and you can trace, and I think I promised you we're going to do this as a class once, where you go back and start from, like, what do we do today? And then where did that come from? right? Go all the way back to the beginning, back to the Bible, and say, this is verse, chapter 17, verse 22, and this is the commentary. This is the oral tradition. And this is what was, and this is how we got to there, et cetera, going down, again, 3,335 years. Everything's recorded. So when we know, it's not just that we have the teachings recorded, we also have the history recorded as well.
Okay, fair. Okay, so I want to dive into some of the things you just talked about, because it's something that I struggle with all the time. Is there's so many sources of text, right? You have the Torah, which is made up of, like, can you just give a high level overview of all the different texts that kind of make up the core of Judaism that you would, as you would describe it?
Okay.
Like from a super high level, 10,000 foot view.
Sure. Okay. So the core text, there's two core texts that make up Judaism. And the two core texts are going to match the two core teachings of the Torah, or kind of the places of knowledge, where the knowledge sits, reservoirs of knowledge. Number one is going to be the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, the Bible. Everyone knows what the Bible is: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy.
Okay. These
5 books were given, a lot of it was given to Moses on Mount Sinai, obviously not all of it, simply because, and this is a big revelation, the Torah tells a story starting from the beginning of creation,
right,
all the way through, right? It starts with Adam and Eve, and it goes all the way through when Moses dies.
Right.
Now, of course, giving of the Torah is in the narrative of history of the years the Torah covers, it's very far. It's almost towards the end, because the Torah, once the Jews come out of Egypt, the narrative slows down from hundreds of years at a time to like, and this happened this month, and this happened that month, so it kind of really slows down. But as far as in the text, the giving of the Torah is in Exodus. If you were keeping track, Exodus is book number 2.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the Torah is written as they experience it in the desert. So as things take place, God tells Moses, okay, add this piece to the Bible. And okay. You know that God, why it's so obvious that God is telling Moses, because Moses isn't arbitrarily saying, oh, we had fish for breakfast this morning, let's put that in as a verse. Because they had fish, I don't know how many times over the 40 years, right? Many experiences happened while they were in the desert. It wasn't just they were like doing nothing.
Right.
But only certain episodes get included, and even the language of that is a prophetic kind of conversation that God has with Moses. So these are the words, these are the phrases you're going to use in the Torah.
Okay, so we have the Torah is the 5 books of Moses.
That's the written Torah.
Okay. Also, like in Christianity, that's referred to as the Old Testament, right?
Correct. Well, that is the first section of the Old Testament.
Oh, okay, got it.
Correct. Then the written Torah continues. At the same time, the oral tradition begins. What is the oral tradition? The oral tradition is, we understand that for God gave the Torah with 2 paths. Stereo sound. One is written, and that's going to be immutable and hard, and the text is written and never changes. It stays the same for the rest of history. And the other thing is called the oral tradition, which is the explanation, and most importantly, the interpretation, meaning how to apply this pragmatically.
Okay.
Because sometimes you're going to come across new things. You'll come across new animals. Are you allowed to eat them? You're going to come across new materials, electric cars. What does Shabbat mean? What does holidays mean? Can you add to Judaism? If you can, what does that mean you can add? Can you add traditions? Can you add culture stuff? Can you add another mitzvah, another commandment? Is there such thing as adding a commandment from God? How does it make any sense? So the oral tradition will also apply, just like in law. For any lawyers listening to this or watching this, this is what American law is. American law started off as an amalgamation of like British common law and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And we have the Constitution, which kind of gives us a Bill of Rights and a bill of kind of how we do things. And then we live life. Mm-hmm. And every couple of years, another major question hits the table, and we say, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? So sometimes in the courts of law, they're just trying to figure out how to apply the law as we know it to kind of more niche cases. Mm-hmm. And sometimes there are fundamental major questions. Is this a right that is included under the Bill of Rights? Is this a right that is considered freedom of speech? Does this get, for example, just a great example is our corporations given freedom of speech? Our corporations basically, in a certain sense, human, right? Mm-hmm. It doesn't say anywhere in the Constitution, it doesn't say anywhere in British common law, the corporation is an entity. Those are things an entity outside of a human being.
Right.
But the courts decided using the tools of American law, how we interpret law, someone somewhere decided that no, corporations are also humans, or at least they have the right of freedom of speech. They can say what they want, how they want, not be. You can't infringe on them.
Right. So okay, so in this scenario, is the Torah the Constitution? It's like this document that you can read, right? Like
Correct.
you can read the Bible, you can read the Torah,
Correct.
but it leaves a lot of questions. So just because you read
Correct.
the Constitution doesn't mean you necessarily know how you're going to answer. Okay, this happens, this niche case. So then, what is the interpretation and the oral tradition called?
So the oral tradition, it was called the oral tradition for many years.
Okay.
And it was forbidden to be written down. The purpose of the oral tradition was to create, in a certain sense, the way I like to think of it is that it forces people to be deeply involved in the Torah.
Okay.
Right? You have to be involved because we're going to forget it. And nobody wants to forget the Torah.
Right.
Right? If you're not going to do it, you're not going to memorize, this piece, and you're not going to be the one that's going to pass it on to the next generation and correct your friends when they're wrong. Who will? Right. So it forces a deeply involved community to the point that every single Jew, by the way, throughout history, let's zoom out for a second. Throughout history, Jews have always been extremely literate, extremely well read, and well written. Mm-hmm. And part of this because being a Jew means you study Torah. So this is the natural. When Jews were not literate, those are considered, from a Jewish historical perspective, Jewish historians, a time of crisis. Just that specific thing. Jews being wealthy or not wealthy, not a crisis. Right. Jews having sovereign power over themselves, a crisis only if that not having sovereign power impinges their ability to be able to read and to study. Right. That's studying the Torah is the thing. Interesting. So okay, so the oral tradition is just called the oral tradition. What's the interpretation called? Same thing. It's the interpretation of the oral tradition is all one thing. It's all one piece. There's rules on how to interpret. And when we interpret, we say that becomes part of, and we're very clear-eyed about this. It's not like we say, oh, we had a question, and the rabbis kind of interpreted it and voted on it, and now it's the word of God, and we don't know how we got there. It just came from God. Suddenly the rabbis woke up one morning, and boom, God said this. No, we know. This was a question. It was a question that we had. The sages discussed the issue. 58% of them said, we understand it this way, based on this verse, with this methodology of understanding it. 42% say, no, the other way. And then they eventually came to the study hall. It was almost like a legislation. They all came and sat together. And then they said, we have to put this up to vote. It's complicated. The nation needs to decide. Mm-hmm. And the sages then voted. And once they tallied up the votes, 58% says A, 42% says B. Jewish law is now 58%. That's the new law. Everyone has to follow the new way. And even people who a week ago were following the old tradition because they understood how it makes sense, and they're part of the 42%. They're part of the minority. That's it. From now on forward, they have to follow the majority. Wow. Okay, so what's that called in Hebrew? Because there's the Torah, and then very good. So now, eventually, that was written down. It was written down by a great sage, Rabbi Yehuda Anasi. His name was Rabbi Yehuda Anasi. Rebbe, he was a very great sage. This is the time of the Roman persecution. It was approximately the year 100 was the Mishnah. The year 100 on the common count. 100 CE? So, 100 CE. Okay. So just over, or just under 2100 years 2,000 years ago. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. A little less than 2,000 years ago. And he wrote it down because we had reached the point where he was very nervous about the persecution. He was 100% correct. And how do you know he was correct? So you see what happens afterwards. There's chaos, there's confusion. And so also, to write it down. Just important to note on the timeline of everything we've been talking about. So Mount Sinai happens at, we'll call it 0. I know that's not true, but like if the starting point is Mount Sinai, then Judaism exists for 1,000 years before before this gets written down. Before the oral tradition gets written down. Gets written down, correct. Okay. And that's called the Mishnah? So the Mishnah is the first text that is written down. Now there is a concept of notes. People wrote secret little notes. They didn't want to forget things. People wrote down little books that they had. They didn't want to forget things, but it wasn't available to the public because the public studied orally. Everything was oral. Everything was tradition. And everything and it wasn't disorganized, extremely organized. when they wrote down the Mishnah, they categorized everything into 6 general categories, and he wrote down a very concise in Hebrew text that's called the Mishnah, and that was the first kind of concretization of the oral tradition. And it was a big, big step that he took, because it says it's an oral tradition. The Torah is very clear. There's a written and an oral. You can't have, you can't write down the oral. That's forbidden.
Do you think at the time he was considered a radical?
Yes, absolutely.
And probably the majority of Jews were against
the majority agreed with him. The majority agreed with him.
Agreed with him. Interesting.
Otherwise, it never would have been accepted.
Interesting. Okay.
So once he writes that down, suddenly it becomes the text. Everyone's reading it. Everyone's understanding it. Everyone's using that as their way. Now, there were texts that he discarded on the floor of the cutting room, and they were collected in what was called the extras books. There's one book was called the leftovers, and one was called the extras, Tosefta and Brisa, respectively. Isn't that great?
That's amazing. Okay, wait.
So they had this oral tradition, and that was now written down. Now, this oral, I know what you're aiming for. Your question is, what is the Talmud?
Well, that and also what's the Gemara?
Good. So the Gemara is the next 300 years. 300 or 400 years.
Okay, so the Mishnah gets written down. It's the first.
And then they begin discussing the Mishnah. Correct. They begin discussing the Mishnah as the basis of their conversation. Until now, they would sit down in the study hall. They would open the text, the Bible itself, and they would say, the text says X, Y, and Z. I once heard from my teacher, who heard from his teacher, who heard from his teacher. This is how you read the text. This is the interpretation. This is the question. His teacher's brother had this question on that. That's how they would talk.
Okay.
Right? It was this long, so now they would come to the study hall and they would say, let's start with the Mishnah. The Mishnah says X, Y, and Z. My great-grandfather told me that when the Mishnah was written, or my great-grandfather told me that there's another way to read the verse, and that was rejected. Just so you know, and by the way, a big part of the Mishnah is the rejects. It tells you something, how not to read the verse, or how not to read the law. Okay. The purpose of it is, don't come 5,000 years later, like we are today, 3,000 years later, and be like, oh, I think I read the verse, and it means something totally different. Like, we don't. We thought about that. We understand what you thought. I get it. Very good.
Right.
You're wrong.
This is so interesting. So why... Oh, man, I have so many questions on this.
Good. Where do you want to go?
Why? Okay, actually, let's continue. So
let's wrap it up. Let's put it into a box.
Yeah.
So now they interpret this for 300 more years, and then there's another great sage of Ashi. Again, a lot of it has to do with Weir and Wed. By this time, the center of gravity of the Jews had shifted to Babylonia. Remember, the Mishnah was written in Israel during the time of Roman persecution after the destruction of the temple. The destruction of the temple took place in the year 70. CE.
Okay.
CE. The Mishnah was finished about 30 or 40 years later. 30 years later, give or take.
Okay. So this was like a 40-year project of writing all this down.
This was more than that. It was. I mean, Rebbe lived for 120 years, and I believe he began working on the Mishnah, 30 or 40 years before he died. It was a very, very serious project, and the purpose of it was to capture the essence of the oral tradition, so that which not be lost. Okay. He was afraid that the amount of time it takes to think about it. The amount of time it takes to memorize and to truly become a good scholar of this oral tradition was many years, and you have to be able to live and survive and not worry about your family and your kids and not be running from persecution. So living in Israel is a great place to do it. And yes, we had hard times and good times, and we always had times of plenty and times of famine. But even so, when you're stationary in your country, you can kind of get through life and still be focused on those who want to be scholars.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the
Mishnah, and then they spend 300 years discussing this again, kind of continuing the discussions. That's the Gemara. Okay. Together, the Mishnah and the Gemara, so they also wrote that down. Those were sage in the Babylonia that wrote that down. Together, the Mishnah and the Gemara together are called the Talmud.
Okay.
And the reason why the Talmud is so critically important is because it is the final repository of oral tradition in a cohesive and single and fully unified fashion. It is every single Jew accepted the Talmud as being the book. So every single Jew looks at it and says, that's the source.
how long does the Talmud span? So it's the Mishnah, which is written over a 40-year period, and it's the Gemara, which is a 300-year period. So it's about 350 years of
Give or
stuff
take,
happening.
but also yes, but also a lot of the traditions of the Mishnah come back from the time the Jews entered into Israel.
Sure.
In other words, if you want to say when's the beginning of the Mishnah, you could say the beginning of the Mishnah is when the Jews rebuild the second temple.
Okay. Which was approximately when? 1100 CE?
It was approximately, the second temple was 420 years. So if you, 70, what's 420 minus 70?
350.
So it's 350 years CE. 350
Okay.
CE. Yeah.
And what is that date?
That's when the temple was built. Second temple was built.
Okay. In 350. And that's the time of the
That's around when the Mishnah, that's when the Mishnah's beginnings kind of begin to be formulated into, that's when Rebbe sits down to write the Mishnah. His first conversation that he's recording is from that.
Got it.
He doesn't go further back, right? He writes the Mishnah
he wrote it in 100.
He did write it in 100, but he writes it in the form of conversations.
Okay.
So he'll say, for example, just as an example.
But common era goes up, not down. Was this BC or CE?
BC.
Oh,
350 BC.
Okay. That's what I was not understanding.
350 BC. It's backwards.
Okay.
So he'll go back. He'll say, for example, he'll say, maybe a simple example. What time are the morning prayers? What time can you start praying in the morning? Right?
Wait. Before we keep going, so I want to wrap a bow on this. So you have the Torah, 5 books of Moses, the Bible. This is one that everyone knows.
Correct.
The Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, whatever. Then separately, we have the oral tradition and the interpretation, which eventually gets written down into the Mishnah. The Gemara is 300 years after the Mishnah, and it's just more interpretation, more talking,
same
more
thing,
arguing.
but now more formalized, right? It's more formalized.
Okay. And so the Mishnah and the Gemara make up what's called the Talmud. And the
Correct.
Talmud is what all Jews agree is this textual source to look back and you can look and you can see the arguments, and there's people have written things down, and there's oral traditions and arguments and who the votes, whatever. So it's a way to formalize questions about Judaism. It's what do you call it? One of the repositories of wisdom.
Repositories of wisdom. It is the ultimate repository of Jewish wisdom.
Okay.
Everything that we do today. So there's things that are invented that were composed after the Talmud, right? There are traditions that were started. For example, I think the Star of David. We don't really have sources from before the Talmud time, right? They say it's from David on his shield, whatever. Maybe not. I'm not going to argue that. It could be they have maybe archaeological digs that have it. Maybe, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But regardless, there are stuff. Gefilte fish, which is a classical Jewish food, which either you love or you hate, depending on who you are. That is way post Talmud, right?
Got it.
But you can't. There's no tradition that is Judaism that doesn't exist in the Talmud. Like
there's no
Judaism.
tradition.
No core Judaism doesn't exist in the Talmud. Or another way to say it, every Jewish thing that we do today that is part of Judaism's kind of core, I would call it core beliefs, core practices, core traditions, every single one of those is spoken to and spoken about in the Talmud with clearly defined. There's another thing that I want to emphasize is that the Talmud is not mostly arguments.
Okay.
It's mostly statements and conversations where people are not fighting, they're interpreting together. Collective interpretation. And the reason why I say this is because a lot of times, Talmud is just a million questions. Nobody knows the answer. That's not true. Much of the Talmud is just statements. It's not even conversations.
Okay.
Rabbi, this says this about Joshua came into Israel. How many cities existed at the time when Joshua came into Israel? How many of them had walls around them? Why? It's just questions in Jewish law. Why it's important. Mm-hmm. Okay. This rabbi says, I know there's 33 cities. This other rabbi says, no, it's actually 13 cities. You have your 1 digit off. The other rabbi says, 33 because the teaching goes this. Really it was 13. Okay, good. Fine. We both agree. Next. And then it just goes. Pages and pages of these. Some of it's random facts. Some of it's like, here's a page of 400 remedies and how to get better. And you can't do any of them on Shabbos because that's considered, not within the law. Boom. Next. Okay, that was great. Now let's go back to the Bible and interpret stories. 4 pages of how the stories of the Bible is supposed to be done. Very good. Now let's talk about if you share a wall with your neighbor, what are the rights that you have, and what is the rights that he has, and how do you respect his rights, and what if the wall falls down? Who pays for the rebuilding?
So it's like this crazy manual on how to live.
Yes.
But
And it spans and because life is messy, it spans everything, and it is messy.
Right.
It is written as the most organic conversation, which is great because it allows, if you're memorizing it, which is when people, even the Talmud, people try to memorize it. I remember as a student, like me, here, 2025, when I was in yeshiva and I was studying the Talmud as a young student in kind of Jewish study halls, one of the exciting things to do is to sit and memorize a few pages, 5, 10, 20, 40, 80, 100 pages by heart. And it's not that difficult because we didn't do it word for word. We did it by concepts and themes.
Got it.
This question followed by this question, followed by this answer, followed by this conversation. And because it was organic, it flows.
So, okay. So I want to, that's kind of closing.
That closes the loop. That closes the loop. Yeah.
That's the Talmud. And the Talmud is this text that people are studying to have answers to questions in modern day. So if there's a question that someone brings to you in 2025 in modern day, and you don't have a clear answer, you'll go to some sort of Talmudic reference. Is that fair?
Yes. First I'll look to see if somebody else found a reference for it.
Okay.
Because there are a lot of great sages that are better and smarter than me. And so I'm assuming, remember the Talmud was closed, a little less than 2,000 years ago, 1,500 years ago?
Right.
In 1,500 years, a lot of very, very smart people wrote a lot of stuff about the Talmud.
Got it. Okay. Oh, that's interesting. So the books behind you are references to the Talmud or about the Talmud in the last 1,500 years.
Yes.
Got it.
Yes.
So, okay. That's very interesting. But a question I have on that is, why did the Talmud stop? What signified the closing of it? Why, it seems like such an interesting document that should be living. Why did it end?
So it does live, but it lives in a new form afterwards.
Okay.
And I think that the way to understand this is you see there's what we call generation gaps within the Jewish tradition.
Okay.
There's an idea that basically there's a certain cadre of scholarship that at some point it stops, it peters out, and there's a new generation of scholarship that can't argue with the old generation. What it means, in other words, like this. If someone came to me with a question, not a niche question, but a very kind of fundamental question. We're doing a Jewish marriage, and we want you to officiate, and we want this tradition, we want to change this aspect of the marriage. We don't want it to be under a chuppah, which is a Jewish kind of wedding canopy, everyone knows. We don't want to break a glass into the chuppah. We want to add in a new tradition. I don't know. We want to release doves under the chuppah. Can we? Right? So the way that I understand if the tradition allows it is that I have to go back and look to see what did the generation prior to us. And when I say generation, it doesn't mean one generation. It's kind of there's these blocks within Jewish history where it's like these bands of scholarship.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's like
it was just like an insane caliber of scholarly wisdom.
And then there's breaks. So you have so someone in my generation, our generation, can't argue with somebody who lived 150 years ago. What you can do is, because they have access, they're greater scholars. You read their books, they're smarter. They're also earlier on in the chain of tradition. So if they kind of imagine it's a river that kind of comes down. But wisdom.
Wait, hang on. Weren't they arguing with people who were earlier in their, they were arguing with people who were before them?
No, not really. They argued with each other.
Okay.
And they could only so again, a lot of opinions, a lot of stuff were not yet defined. If it was undefined, you can do whatever you want.
Okay.
If it was already defined, you'd had to find someone, in the last generation that already agreed with you.
Okay. And if you couldn't do it.
Correct. Or in other words, if you say contradicts what everyone else says previous, then you're wrong. Then you're on zero.
So this is my question. It seems crazy to say that they thought of everything. It seems crazy to say that there is nothing left that's undefined that doesn't have room to be shaped.
Of course not. There's so much left to do.
There's so much left to do, but you just said that if there's, or maybe
you can't argue with what was done already. So remember, we're going from undefined to defined.
Okay, so let's ask it this way. What in modern day 2025 is not defined by Judaism currently
What
as
is
it
not yet
stands?
defined?
What's not yet defined?
Okay. Lab-grown meat. Is it kosher? And is it
Mm.
considered meat, or can you eat it with cheese?
Cool.
Lab-grown cheese, same question. Electric vehicles. Can you use them in experiences like Shabbat, for example? We don't drive in Shabbat.
Right.
Can you drive an electric vehicle? What if it's an autonomous vehicle? Can AI vehicle pick you up? Can you turn your house into an AI house? Because generally speaking, you're allowed to set machinery to run without your interaction with it.
Right.
Right. For example, the best example, this is a thermostat. Right. It used to be that you lit a fire in your fireplace, and then your fire burned out, you were stuck. Or you could bake it up with coal and really have a really hot fire, and it would last you the whole Shabbat, the whole whatever. Because again, on Shabbat, for those who are listening and aren't familiar, Shabbat is the day that you're not allowed to do work, and therefore, what work is defined in the Talmud at length. What exactly it is based on the Torah, we have a lot of interpretation. This is what the rabbis spent a lot of time doing, understanding what it is. Again, we came out of the desert, we knew what work was. We go into Israel, we have suddenly many new situations. We have rivers to dam, we have holes to dig, we have fences to build. You have to understand and explain, this is allowed, this is not allowed. What if you're walking along in your field and you see your fence is broken? Are you allowed to just put a rock there to make sure no animals come through? Or do you have to wait until after Shabbat ends? Tomorrow, come back. Conversations to be had. Okay, we're going off tangents here. But the point is, machinery you can set. So I can set a thermostat. I can set a thermostat in my house and say, I want the house to be between this and this kind of temperatures. And it runs on its own without my help. And I can enjoy that because machinery is doing it. I'm not doing anything. Pre-Shabbat I set it, no problem. Even if I have security cameras in my house and they're running constantly, no problem. I'm not interacting with it. It's just recording images of the thing. But what if the cameras are turned on when I walk into a room? What if AI is sensing which room in the house I'm in and how the temperature is, and it's adjusting the temperature to me in the moment? Is that allowed? Right? These are things that are going to become more practical.
Right.
Smart homes are not so difficult. Smart homes that adjust to you suddenly becomes a question. And I'm not saying it's going to be allowed or not allowed. I don't know.
Right.
We don't know yet.
Right. But so here's my question, because we've talked about, off the mic before about like how right now in 2025 there's like you said, no one's adding to the Talmud. It doesn't get, the books are being written behind you, but no one's adding to the Talmud. So who, like literally, like who are the names? Who are the groups of people in 2025 who are going to be having these conversations and writing whatever the the AI home, who is that? Who are those people?
Very good. So Judaism is very, very decentralized today, especially. Blockchain. It used to be, I know, crazy. By the way, literally. Now, let me ask you a question on the blockchain. Yeah,
I'm not a crypto guy.
No, it's fine. But the idea. Let me ask you a question.
Satoshi was a Jew.
Satoshi was Moses. Now, here's the question. If there's a transaction that is suggested to the chain, what decides that it becomes part of the chain or not?
From my limited understanding of how blockchain works, I think it's a decentralized thing. So you have miners who are validating the transactions. Correct.
And then right. But they also they close the block. And how does the block close? Because they put it out to the entire network, and basically everyone votes. It's not really called voting. There's a different way of saying it, but essentially everyone, if they accept it or not, if more than 50% of the node network accepts it, then that becomes included in the chain, and any other simultaneous mining attempts that didn't go through are dropped.
Okay.
And then it restarts. Now, when your block is accepted into the chain, that's when you get a mining fee. In short. Okay. In Judaism today, it's the exact same thing. Right? There's a rabbi. Currently, I am in the middle of a study program, actually in the middle of 2 study programs. One of them is about Jewish marriage. I'm getting recertified to do marriages. I want to get a certificate from Israel's rabbinate.
Okay. And
so I'm an Orthodox rabbi, and I have this, and I have all these certifications, but I want to have from Orthodox Israel, and also because I'm just interested. I don't need it. I just want it. Okay. So currently, I'm studying with there's going to be 3 or 4 rabbis that are teaching this class. How do they choose the rabbis that are going to teach the class? Because they're the rabbis who know their stuff. They're the rabbis. So when anyone asks, who can I ask a question to? They call this rabbi. And then you call him, and he gives you an answer. And you say, where's your source? And he says, here, here, and here. And you go off on your own, and you say, how could you even say such a thing? It's so crazy. You go to look at the sources, and sure enough, the sources, either he just repeated to you what the sources says, he just pulls the information and gives it to you, or or he's inventing a new understanding. And he says, my understanding of these three sources leads to this interpretation. And because he's smart, and because he has wisdom.
He's citing his sources. So you're free to go back and validate and check his sources, and maybe you agree with him, maybe you don't.
I can reject what he's saying.
Right. Okay. So,
but then multiple rabbis will do the same thing. Meaning, I'll go to him and I'll say, okay, what are we able to do this? I'll just give you an example. An example which is a great example because it's very irrelevant to like real heavy issues, but it's a good visualization. The ketubah, which is the Jewish marriage and witnessing document. It witnesses that there was a transaction. It isn't the thing that makes them married. It is a witness to the experience, part of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So everyone knows the ketubah is beautiful. Today, in modern times, we have artwork involved. It's a new thing. It's the last 50 years, maybe even 30 years. It's gorgeous. It's beautiful. I'm sure you have one that's very, very nicely decorated.
We just got it framed. It's beautiful.
Amazing. You're probably going to hang it on the wall of your house. It's gorgeous. Can a ketubah be written in a circle text?
I hope so. I think ours is.
Exactly. So I know a rabbi who says that his opinion is it's not good. Okay? It doesn't look like a technical document. And also, if you go to the sources, there is a source when it's talking not about marriage text, but about other types of documents. It says there, it's good. The lines should be even. You shouldn't have one long line, one short line. It should all kind of be congruent with itself. So that way you wouldn't have somebody be able to add in letters and words, right, to the text. Mm-hmm. Because next thing you know, we have two witnesses who sign at the bottom. And maybe they're going to add in, Jeff, you owe Robin not only all the ketubah money, but also 3 goats, 2 Teslas,
mm-hmm.
and 1 Falcon rocket. Just add it in small letters. Why not? But if it's a document as a text and it's square, or it doesn't say square, it says if it's a document and text, then you can't add anything because you see where the lines end. You see where they start. You see.
That one's tough.
In other words,
a circle is clearly a circle. Same thing.
Oh, so that's exactly the argument. So one rabbi will say, what do you mean? The text says 1 line, 1 long, 1 short. 1 long, 1 short doesn't work.
Right.
And most of the other rabbis, including myself, and I didn't just rely on my opinion. I called the rabbi that I'm studying with, I respect. I said, how do you feel about circle ketubah? He's like, it's not a problem.
Interesting. Okay.
Now, I didn't ask him for his source because I just trusted him. I'm like, fine. But now when I'm studying with him, I'm going back into the sources. And I see the source for why someone would say no. And I understand his logic, why it makes no difference.
Interesting.
It depends on how nitty-gritty you're going to take the text and how is it about the meaning. And that's just an example. And again, the reason why I chose this example is because whichever way you go in this argument, if you disagree with me and say, oh, no, circle's bad, there are rabbis today who will agree with you. So it kind of fits both tracks. So today, I would say there's no final conclusion. In 50 years, there might be some sort of kind of collective understanding that circle ketubah have caused too many problems. We've had this. It's way too much. From now on, we're not allowed.
Get out of here.
Or the other way around. Or we'll say 100% is allowed. Right. This idea that there's a problem with it is insane. Stop making problems. Stop even mentioning any problems. Every ketubah should be the shape of it. Finished.
Okay.
Right.
All right. I wanna ask a. Well, there's 2 directions that maybe we can go. You decide. I'll pitch them both to you, and you decide.
Okay.
From everything I'm hearing, it sounds like that there's this linear progression, and people are agreeing, and over time it's forming. But in 2025, when I look around and I look at Judaism, there's Orthodox, there's modern Orthodox, there's conservative, there's Reform, there's Reconstruct. Like there's all. It feels like there's so many ways of practicing. And it doesn't jive with the story that I'm hearing you say. So I guess that's one avenue that I want to maybe go down. The other avenue is how do all of these explanations work? Or how do you answer the question of, Rabbi, I'm not sure I believe in God? You pick.
Well, let's answer the first in short, and it'll bring us to the second.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll do both. Why not? So first of all, how do we have so all other narratives within Judaism, meaning you look around and you see all the different kind of flavors of Judaism that exist. Mm-hmm. Most of them there's always an organic narrative as to how it started and when it started, right?
Okay.
Some, as an example, just Sephardic and Ashkenazic, which is 2 kind of flavors within kind of classical Judaism. It's based really on where they were in exile. Were they in exile in Eastern Europe, or were they in exile in Europe in general? Or were they in exile in starting their exile from Babylonia, we went into exile to Spain, Portugal, Morocco, things like that.
And just to be clear, Sephardic is the Spain, Portugal, Morocco. Ashkenazi is Eastern Europe, mostly.
Yeah, Europe. Okay. Yeah, very good. So that's an example of where kind of the circumstances of our narrative, of our story, led to this split in the situation. And going back to the blockchain narrative, it is possible to have a hard fork in the blockchain narrative that works. It's possible that there is a fork where certain one group goes in one direction. 99% of our DNA is the same. 99% of the tradition is the same. Mm-hmm. And there are certain things that are a little bit different. And what's interesting is that even the Code of Jewish Law, which is the primary text that people use today to understand what you're supposed to do and what you're not supposed to do, because the Talmud is very, very big. It's very complicated. So they use the Code of Jewish Law. The Code of Jewish Law is actually printed. It was a joint effort by one Sephardic rabbi and one Ashkenazic rabbi who lived in two different countries. Mm-hmm. But they knew of each other. So when the Sephardic rabbi wrote his Code of Jewish Law, the other rabbi waited until he received it, and then he just wrote notes on it. So now there's one text called the Code of Jewish Law, and in there you see both flavors of Judaism in it. Now, Reform, Conservative, Reconstructionist Judaism, all of that started also for historical reasons. Primarily, Reform Judaism started because of emancipation. In the same way that most of Europe went through this kind of big, was called emancipation, we call it the Haskalah. These were historical experiences, historical movements that took over, that swept through Europe. It affected Jews in the same type of way, in the same way that other religions also had their own reformations. So Judaism had a reformation happen to it. Now, I'm an Orthodox rabbi. I'm a Hasidic Jew, a religious Jew. I believe that they're making a mistake. That is my personal, and I think that most religious Jews agree with me, that the mistake was made. And again, I don't think that Jews today who are Reform or Conservative are making that mistake. I think the founders of Reform, who started it, who knew what they were doing, they understood that they were doing a reformation of the religion. I think they were mistaken and they were wrong. I think that people today, most people grow up with whatever tradition you grew up with. And for someone to change lanes is very, very difficult. I don't know if you ever tried merging on a highway, especially with Jews. It's insane. But also because what you're familiar with is what you're familiar with. And sure. What you grew up with is what you grew up with. So it's very difficult to shift. Right? I'll be honest, I think about this myself. If I grew up not as a Hasidic religious Jew, if I grew up a Reform Jew, I'd like to think that I would become Hasidic.
Right.
Do I know that for sure? I don't know. Would I be exposed? Right. Would I be exposed in time? Even if I was exposed, would I have the gumption, the energy, the effort to be able to do? It's a major life change to become a religious person. I believe strongly in the truth of it, and I would hope that as a person growing up, I would see that as well, and I'd also kind of take the leap of faith to go follow that tradition. Mm-hmm. But I'm thankful that I grew up with this. So it's much less difficult for me. That's the honest truth.
Right.
But so Judaism today, when you look around, a lot of the flavors and the experiences come from those kind of different forks off of traditional Judaism. That's why I don't like the term Orthodox Judaism, because it's really not the orthodoxy. Orthodox means like kind of stuffy, the original. The term that is kind of easier would be like classical.
Okay. It's
kind of the general main flavor of Judaism that existed for 3,000 years, from Mount Sinai. And again, throughout history, don't think that Reform and Conservative and Orthodox, just as an example, the flavoring of Judaism, both within kind of Ashkenazi and Sephardi, which is within tradition, and also those like tradition, but not necessarily holding to the same fundamentals of faith. It existed before as well. We had it in Egypt, again, not the original Egypt, but I don't like time of Maimonides. We had it in Europe. We had it in Spain for a little bit. There were other times we had it even before the Talmud was written down in biblical Israel. There were times when other groups spawned off of Judaism, and some of them lasted for 100 years. Some lasted for 20 years. Some lasted for 500 years. But here we are today, 3,000 years later. The Judaism that survives is the Judaism that is true to tradition.
Right. That's something I always think about is like, what is it going to look like in 2 generations from now?
Correct.
It's fascinating because I have no idea.
But what I think is very fascinating, I think that the lines between the different denominations are coming down. I think it's just an example of where you see this, which I really is very emotional almost. Not almost, it is. The famous song that they're singing in Israel today, which means God always loves me and will always be good for me. It is a very classical Israeli song. It is the first song in the history of Israel that has hit top rankings in every single demographic, every single religious stream in Israel. Whether you're super, super Hasidic, super, super secular, everyone is singing the song.
That's cool.
I don't even know if the guy who composed it is religious. And it's based on a religious tradition. I don't know if anyone cares.
That's really
where
cool.
It came from or who started it. The themology of what is the theme of it? The theme is that God loves us and will take care of us and will give us good.
Mm-hmm.
Very rarely do we have this kind of melding of Israel culture. And Israel is a place that's very contentious. If you've ever been to Israel, it's very intense, right? And there's this massive, just there's a flow across denominational borders. And I'm a Chabad rabbi, and Chabad is also very, very strong on the same idea. We look at every Jew. I talk to denominations when we have this kind of conversation, which is kind of a bigger picture. But in human interaction with people, I don't see denominations.
Right.
People will tell me, "Oh, I'm a Reformed Jew." Like, that doesn't mean anything.
Right.
You're a Jewish person. Either you're curious and you want to learn more, or you're not yet curious and you don't want to learn more yet.
Right.
But it's a spectrum of how much Judaism are you interested in and how much do you want to do.
So this is an interesting point that I would love to get your commentary on. So I think that is unique to Chabad, right? In the sense of if we're talking about religious, I'm not going to use Orthodox, but religious classical Judaism,
right?
Like I always tell the story of if I was in Israel and I went to the Western Wall and I was looking around at these very religious Jews who were praying, and it almost was like I felt like I had nothing in common with them. There was no commonality. And I left and I was telling my friend about the experience, and he was like, "Hey man, like you can't feel that way. You can't think that way. Like there is something inherently that connects everybody. And so like, that's what we have to believe. Like there's not enough Jews in the world to not have that feeling." And I got to go back to the wall after we had that experience and have a new perspective on it. And it was interesting. I must admit though, I don't feel like a super strong kinship or connection. I think in large part because what I see them doing is very foreign, right? Like I don't understand a lot of what they're doing, and I feel like they look at me with a lot of judgment, right? So yeah, just curious your commentary on that.
I think that's changing. In other words, I think that people have that feeling, and I think it's wrong. In other words, not wrong like it's wrong, but wrong as in it's mistaken. I think a lot of it's mistaken. I think that if we were to be together at the wall, right, and you would ask me, "What's that guy doing?" I'd be like, "Oh, they're praying the afternoon prayer." And you'd be like, "Oh, we've done it before." Right? And I'd be like, "Yeah, that's a minion." You just can't tell because there's a bajillion people here. But if you look carefully, right, that guy's praying in the middle because he's the one leading the service. The 9 people, 10 people around him are the ones who are part of his group. And that person over there who's swaying off and doing something else, they're doing their own thing. You right away begin to pick up the nuances.
Right.
The reason I think the main reason why you felt that lack of kinship is primarily because they dress a little bit differently, which automatically we're humans. Again, we're going back to the beginning. We're bodies, souls inside bodies. Our bodies take a very big place in our mind, which is a problem, in my opinion, because the more you value the soul, the more you realize that everyone's very similar. We're all brothers and sisters. We all have the same kind of vibe. So that's number one. Number two, I think that this idea of the other direction, where you're looking at how they look at you, I think that's also mistaken. I think that there are still certain groups and certain people who are still struggling with that. I think primarily, for the most part, people are, and I see this, you see it all over social media. So obviously, these are the people who are leaning more towards that direction. But I think it's true across the board. People are looking outside and saying these are Jews just like us, and yes, they may dress differently, and yes, they may live in Austin, Texas, some godforsaken place. But hey, it's a great place, and we can get kosher food there and hang out.
Right.
And I'm seeing more and more. I think that seeing that in the other person isn't necessarily as strong as you could imagine, as you would
But
imagine.
you're seeing that outside of the Chabad movement?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
Generally speaking, what Chabad does, it takes the rest of the classical Jewish world 30 or 40 years to catch up to.
Okay, so it might be a good time. Could you give a quick brief of what Chabad is? You get like 10 seconds.
Okay. Chabad, in short, there's a Hasidic, the Baal Shem Tov.
What is Hasidic?
Baal Shem Tov was a mystical teacher who lived in Europe, specifically like the Carpathian Mountain region, which is Ukraine today. And it was, he lived and he revealed a mystical Kabbalistic tradition that is very earthy, meaning it's very pragmatic and practical. Okay. And he revealed a new way of approaching Judaism that, on the one hand, was completely new, on the other hand, was totally obvious and totally congruent with everything that had been spoken before. One of these, a lot of the new inventions, you see it, you're just like, of course,
right? We
always knew that, but we didn't because this is new. So that is Hasidism, and the Baal Shem Tov was the first Hasidic master. His student started a branch or a flavor of Hasidic teaching that is called Chabad.
Okay.
Chabad is the name of the philosophical flavor, the Hasidic philosophical flavoring. Lubavitch, which is a synonym to Chabad, is a location where the movement basically grew and had most of its growth. In fact, these blue books and these gray books and these red books behind me are Chabad Hasidic philosophy.
Got it. But there's other flavors of Hasidic philosophy.
Correct. There are other flavors. Okay. Most of them are similar in philosophy. What their difference is mostly a little bit of stress, what they stress on. Okay. Slight differentiations, and a lot of their and also where they're from, because kind of
geographically speaking,
yeah. Which area you're from, where they are today, and kind of becomes like which group are you from? It's kind of like, did you go to almost like football teams, right?
Right.
Do you root for Michigan today, or do you root for UT?
Right. We all like football.
It's all football, and it also makes no difference which school you're rooting for.
Right. Interesting.
Right. You're rooting, and you root for your school even if it's losing.
What's
Chabad?
No. What's so if you have Hasidic, but what are branches outside of Hasidism?
Oh, good. You have Breslov, you have Bobov, you have Amshana, you have Nidvarna, you have Tzanz, you have Skver, Satmar is included in that. You have,
and these are all basically these are different philosophies, right? They're not Hasidic philosophy.
There are Hasidic philosophies, and there are flavors within Hasidic philosophy.
Oh, these are all different.
These are all Hasidic.
No, I'm saying outside of Hasidic.
Outside of Hasidic, you have what's called, we would call it to Yeshivish, and in Yeshivish, was like based on the yeshiva schools kind of vibe, and you have Brisk, you have Tells, you have Slobodka a little bit, and then you'll have like just communities that are based on like where they are. You have the New York style, you have Lakewood, you'll have Chicago Tells, etc., etc.
Interesting. There's so many flavors.
Many flavors, hundreds and hundreds of flavors, and you can within each one you can niche down. Right. In other words, even within Breslov, you have different types. Breslov from Yerushalayim, from Jerusalem, and Breslov from Tzfat. It's a little bit different flavors. And you have in Breslov, Jerusalem, you probably have two different flavors. In Bobov, you have two different kind of. Today, there's two major communities, both in New York. One's 45th and one's 47th Street. So it's two different synagogues, and they kind of, is the flavor that different? No, it's very, very, very similar.
Right. Okay.
Even in Chabad, you could have different flavors of yeshivas. Do they emphasize this way or that way? What's the real difference? Minute differences. But reality is humans like to hang out with people who are either very similar or completely different than themselves.
Right.
That's kind of what we gravitate towards. So, just the way we are. And even in Chabad, I have my friends that I hang out with, right? Most of us went to similar yeshiva. So we're friends both because we have a similar lived experience of being in the same yeshiva, the same schools. Mm-hmm. Again, back to UT and Michigan, right? You're going to hang out with the guys that went or Cal Poly. You're going to hang out with the guys that are from there. Why? Because you root for the same team. You hang out with the same guys. You can laugh about the same problems on campus. Right. You can laugh at the same bars that are still there. Oh my gosh, I can't believe it. right? And then that's it, you know. Then you go have a beer together and talk about life, which is the same for everybody. So
Right.
that's interesting. Now, Chabad specifically, in Chabad, there's been the development of Chabad has evolved over the years. There's a lot of, we can get into a very long philosophical discussion, but the Rebbe, Rabbi Mendy Levertov, who passed away in 1994, physically. Again, this is back to the body soul thing. We believe that we're still his followers because his energy and his vision, his vibe, continues. He gives, there was one of the only sages in, I think, history that has an insane amount of just teaching output and also an insane amount of creative communal output. And the Rebbe, as a Chabad leader, started this new concept called going out and starting new communities, new Jewish communities, in places where there are no Jewish communities. It's called, the Hebrew term for shlichut, which means to be an emissary. I am the emissary of the Rebbe here. Again, even though the Rebbe passed away in 94, and I only moved to Austin in 2013, we are considered an emissary. I consider myself an emissary of the Rebbe. And that's because he both created a structural organizational system to allow this, but also energetically he created this power that I want every person to go out and make the world holier and better. And there's specific flavorings within that, and why is that birthed in Chabad? Why is it birthed in the Rebbe's philosophy? Why is it birthed? There's books on it, so I can, this is more than a 2-minute thing. But this is kind of, when we say Chabad today, we mean Chabad that was founded and created the modern version of Chabad, if you would call that, which is the most developed version, which the Rebbe became Rebbe. He became the leader of the Chabad movement in 1950, and just was a rocket ship.
He continued that way until his death in 1994.
Until 1994,
yeah. And that's why if you go to any country in the world or any college campus in the U.S., there is almost always a Chabad.
There are 5,000. Maybe actually more now. There's 5,500, I think, Chabad rabbi and rabbis and couples. Most of the time it's couples because it's a life mission. It's not just a personal career choice. So it's 5,000-ish couples. It means 10,000 people are in this official position, official role. There's a lot more people who are involved in this that are not in an official role, right? But there's 5,000 in an official role. And every week there's about two new ones that open up.
Wow.
Every week.
Wow.
Which is,
and you're almost all related.
About 100 years. Yeah, not anymore. It used to be that I could be like, oh, Timbuktu? Yeah, my first cousin. What do you mean? I know. Chaim, it's his name. Now it's more like, yeah, we went to yeshiva together. Although now that I'm already kind of been, it's funny, as I've experienced as a rabbi, it's like, oh, do you know the rabbi in Teaneck, New Jersey? I'm like, I know of him.
Right.
We weren't in the same yeshiva. I'm not related at all. I know of him because he one time did this article, and fascinating guy, really interesting, but I never spoke to him with like 2 words. But we all go to the same convention in New York every year, so we do mix a lot. So I do see people.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about God.
Yeah, he's here. You want to ask him?
Small question.
Yeah.
If someone comes to you and says, Rabbi, I don't know if I believe in God. Because all the things we've been talking about, the soul as a divine entity,
Correct.
right? I guess, do you think you can have a spiritual life without believing in God, or you think that the definition of God is incorrect, or what? Like, how do you define God?
So I would argue that most people who don't believe in God, it's because they haven't had one of two things. They haven't had a good definition of God. And if you properly define God to them, they'll say, I probably believe in that. And my experience of that is with people who believe in the universe, right? Oh, the universe is sending me a message, or it's serendipitous, and it happens so many times that I have this experience, and it's almost like the world is sending me a message. Okay, so to me, it's like, that's God. It's just the reason why you're not calling God, because I believe there's an internal resistance against calling it God. The reason why there's an internal resistance is because God is personal. The universe is impersonal. So even though you like to have the world, the universe sends you a message, right? The universe is telling you something. Or my grandmother died and then a butterfly landed in my garden. That's my grandmother saying something, a message to me. It means you do believe in life beyond life. It means you do believe in spirituality. You do believe in all these things. But you don't like calling it God. And why don't you like calling it God? Simple, because if you believe in God, then you also believe that God requires a relationship.
Mm.
And a relationship requires doing something, and sometimes when it's uncomfortable.
Right.
In fact, I would argue that most relationships are built on the uncomfortable things you do. It's easy to do the things that are easy, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you really build the relationship? Is when you have to do a favor for somebody you didn't want to do.
Right.
Or you weren't so happy to do. Or you didn't think
Right.
of it. And they're like, oh, you should probably do it. And you're like, oh. And you're married. I'm married. I think we know this experience as well. In our relationships, where is the real kind of the heavy work of building a relationship that comes at a time, specifically when either we didn't want to do it, we're doing it anyways,
Mm-hmm.
or when there's like some sort of I don't want to say it's like we don't want to do it, we didn't think of doing it. There's a demand suddenly made of us.
Mm-hmm.
Need, our significant other needs our time, needs our attention, needs our space, needs something from us. That's where a relationship is built.
Hmm.
That's where relationships are really. That's the meat of the relationship. Holding hands and spending time doing fun things is not where the relationship is built. That's where the relationship is that's where it kind of plays.
Mm-hmm.
The foundations of a relationship is not that.
And so if you agree that there is a God, or you're calling the universe God, you have this personal relationship. Now you're admitting that there requires some work and uncomfortableness to put in.
Right. And so that's why people will say, I don't believe in God. That way they don't have to follow through on the relationship side. They can get messages from the universe and accept these kind of out of world things, but they're not required to return that or repay that with anything specific. Whether it means being a better person on a general level, or if they believe there's a spiritual tradition that they have to actually do certain things, whether it is give of their time, give of their money, whatever it is, calling it God means there's more weight, more to the relationship. If it's the universe, then it's easier. That's my personal. But again, someone who says to me, I don't believe in God, but then I have a conversation, they believe in all these other things, then to me they do believe in God. They just don't know how to label it.
Right.
That's number one.
Okay, go.
Yeah, and part two is that I think there are arguments to be made for belief in God. And I think there's a lot of logical arguments. We went through a very long conversation at the beginning of this podcast regarding kind of the historical, traditional kind of logical narrative. But there's a much simpler argument, and there's a few of these arguments that can be made. I'm honest, there's a bunch of places where you can find sources for the exact arguments why we believe God exists. That are logical, very logical conversations. People you can argue, you can discuss this with individuals, and when you get through the conversation, they will logically be forced to admit that there probably is a God. Now, not everyone will agree. Again, logic is very personal, so you can say, I hear what you're saying, but I don't really agree with you, or that's not persuasive to me. Okay, fine. But I think that for the most part, most people have never thought through the process. And because of that, that's what they say. I don't believe in God. Why? For whatever reason, it's easier. Mm-hmm. It's easier. It feels cooler sometimes. It's more edgy to not believe in God, because then you have to take responsibility for your own life. And you can't just rely on some outside force going to take care of it for you. There are psychological reasons why people will say they don't believe in God. To me, I think for the most part, most people who say they don't believe in God, they don't know what they're disagreeing with. But again, this is 99% of the people. And there are definitely some people who say they don't believe in God. They truly mean it. They understand what they're rejecting. But I think most people don't know what they're rejecting. And even if they do, I don't take it so seriously. So you don't believe in God yet. Maybe later you'll believe in God.
I feel like nowadays it's more edgy to believe in God. Yes
and no. I think it depends which group you're talking to.
Sure. And where you are.
When.
Yeah, that's fair.
Sadly, it's a reality that as when the world goes through darker times, or when people go through darker times in their life, suddenly their belief in God comes out.
Right.
Right.
Well, there was a book, I never actually read it, but Why I Believe in God on Airplanes or something.
Oh, interesting. I like that.
I think it was written by, I think, a rabbi. But I remember reading that, or like seeing that title as a kid and being like, yeah, that checks out. You be an atheist on the ground, and then you take off in this metal tube in the sky. You're like,
sketchy. Okay, no, I don't believe in God. But it's in a certain sense, on the one hand, I don't like when someone comes to me and they're in a bad place as a rabbi. They come to you and they're in a bad place, and they say, they want to get more interested in Judaism. They want to start discovering more Judaism. I have a struggle internally. So on the one hand, I don't want your belief in God to be based on the fact that you're going through a tough time. I want your belief in God to come from a pure place. On the other hand, isn't this why we believe in God? So we should find comfort in, it's not why, but isn't this the benefit of believing in God?
Right.
I should deny someone the comfort of knowing that there's a divine being that cares about you, that wants to take care of you, that has your best interest in mind. And even though it's the most difficult time for you right now, there's somebody there. You don't feel it, but somebody out there, something out there, some greater thing that cares about you.
Right.
And this is the power of religion.
I think it's the best argument for religion, right? Is like this, like all the things you're describing, for sure. And not but
that's subjective. The challenge. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, so like going back and tying to some of the earlier points of God delivering the Torah to every Jewish person at Mount Sinai, right? And like that's like the start of this whole thing, is this collective memory that we don't really remember, but we kind of do, but we really don't. Like, there was a period of time where everyone thought the earth was flat, and that was collectively what it was. And then if you came out and said it's round or it's spherical, whatever, you were like, nuh-uh, you're crazy. So why I think I know what you're gonna say, but why is this different?
First of all, the Torah says the earth is round. Anyways, point is, which is funny because there are sources where it's like, oh, we should have read that right many years ago. First of all, it's a good question. It's a good question because in a certain sense you say, if religion, the way that we experience it is very subjective.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, a lot of things are very subjective. We all try to say that it's all about, logic and first principles and things like that. But the reality is, it depends who your friends are. It depends depends what happened. Almost, by the way, in a certain sense, who you marry. Right? Who do you marry? Best person in the world, the one you love, true soulmate. It also truly depends on were you in the room at the time that they walked in. Right. And if you weren't, then maybe you wouldn't marry them. Right. Reality, right? Or you have these weird stories where people like visiting and they pass through the city and then they meet somebody and suddenly and then they get married. Right. And you're like, so again, if you believe in spiritual energies, believe in God plans the world so that way you should meet the right person at the right time. If you're going to be a little more cynical, you'll be like, well, luckily it happened, or else who knows what would have happened. Very subjective. It's very interesting. But I think that this is why also Judaism is very much layered with also revelation along the way. Right? As much as there is only there's this logical approach to Judaism. You have the logic of the tradition chain, the logic of we believe God exists. One of the arguments for the fact that God exists, you look at the world, it's so complicated. It's pretentious to say that it came to be on its own. In the same way that there's a famous story of a rabbi about an argument with a philosopher. They were good friends, and the philosopher was like, "It's not possible. The world obviously kind of evolved on its own." And the rabbi disagrees, but okay. And at some point, his friend walks out of the room, and the rabbi takes the ink, and paints quickly a beautiful sketch across this this paper on the table, and then, right as the guy's about to walk back in, takes the inkwell and spills it just across the bottom and leaves the inkwell spilled out. And he walks over to the window, looks out the window. The friend walks in, comes to the table and says, "Oh, Rabbi, who made this beautiful painting?" He turns around and says, "What do you mean?" He says, this glorious sketch. I didn't know you're such an artist." He says, "Oh, no. I bumped the table when I came to look at the window and it spilled. And this just gorgeous painting just came to be. It's really incredible." He's like, "Come on, who are you bluffing? You and I both know. You sketched this. It's gorgeous." He says, "So one thing, the painting that couldn't have come to be without an artist. But it's not possible for it to come together without an artist. You tell me the world is possible to come together without an artist, without someone's divine intelligence that creates it." It's a very basic and kind of almost rudimentary argument. But it's very powerful because if you look at the world, with open eyes, you look around. This is, by the way, one of the things that I think is very powerful in today's world is there's a resurgence in spirituality. But to your saying, I believe in God is kind of countercultural, is kind of edgy. It depends on what you call God. If you're talking spirituality, I mean, we're in Austin, Texas. There's a resurgence in spirituality we've never seen before. Right. Sometimes it's
which is interesting.
Plant assisted, agreed. Cold plunge assisted, fine. Breathwork assisted, but I think that these are the stream of consciousness is moving towards understanding. And a lot of it is also even like the material world, which used to be the goal of life. It's like that's not important. The important thing is that what we feel here, what I can experience.
Right.
I think it's beautiful.
That's
and again,
true.
I think that the religion side of that is just because people misinterpret what religion and what God is.
Right. So you think it's just purely a definition? It's a misunderstanding in definition.
Yeah, mostly.
Interesting. Has there ever been an argument against that you have agreed with, or at least
what?
like have you ever had a conversation with someone and you've walked away thinking, that's actually a good point against what you're saying?
Against religion, against God?
Yeah.
So I've read stuff like that.
Okay. What were those?
One argument was like, if Apollo, we have the Greek tradition that Apollo rode across the sun on a chariot. What if everyone agreed that was the reality? Would that make it real? And today we know it's a mythology. So again, I didn't agree with it. I understood the point they're making, but I think it's very different. So I wasn't ever fully convinced into that thought stream. I have tried to read stuff to understand because I am interested. Again, why I obviously do believe in God very strongly. It is interesting for me to go into the mind of a disbeliever. And sometimes people will point to contradictions in the text that I'll be like, oh wow, that's intense. And then I go find some Jewish tradition from 200 years ago or 500 years ago. They already pointed it out. They already dealt with it. And sometimes it's so. To me, even the fact that they pointed it out is already enough to satisfy my curiosity. Meaning, this guy isn't the first guy. There's many people before. But then also sometimes I'll read that and I'll be like, that doesn't satisfy me. But it doesn't mean that I disagree with Judaism or tradition or anything like that. There are what I mean to say is there are times when I look at the interpretations of the tradition and I say, I agree that this is the reality. I agree this is the truth. And I also understand that it doesn't sit with me as much as I would love the truth to sit with me. Or it's another way of saying, I don't know if I agree with this.
Is there anything you can share like currently or like the most recent one that happened to you?
I'm trying to think. That's a good question. A lot of them are more niche stuff. Like it's like the order of a Jewish marriage, right? There are aspects. So first of all, there was a few things like which documents signed first, or like the order of the marriage ceremony. So there are aspects of the order of the marriage ceremony, which I say there's like 5 reasons why we have a chuppah, right?
Okay.
The canopy.
Yeah.
Now, of those 5 reasons, 2 of them, let's say, it would make more sense to put the ring on, that the groom would place the ring on the bride's finger before they enter the chuppah, not under the chuppah.
Okay.
So to me, it's like, what are you doing? Are you faking it? Like, if that's the reason, then why are we doing it underneath? Let's stop before, do the ring, and then do it in. And the rabbis from 300 years ago deal with it. They're like, it's close enough. It's fine. Like, close enough. We can just change the ceremony. Now, I understand a few things. I understand, number one, that's probably not the main reason. That's a secondary or a third reason why we have the chuppah. And there's probably Kabbalistic understandings, and that I actually do understand. There's Kabbalistic reasons that make it. But I'm saying if you leave the mystical tradition out, you just go from a very legalistic tradition or the legal perspective, it doesn't make sense to do it this way. And it drove me bananas. There's also like the 2 documents in a Jewish wedding. There's actually 2 documents. There's a ketubah, which you know of, and the other document is called the Tanai, which is called it's another tradition that comes before. It's a very old tradition that kind of nowadays a lot of weddings don't even do it anymore. Not that it's good; they just don't do it. But one thing that bothered me was that you're signing it, and you're signing it after you already signed the ketubah, and it doesn't make sense. So I found literally last night. I saw a footnote in this book, this text that I'm studying. And the footnote says, "Be very careful that the document that you sign, you make sure the order of the document, that this kind of minor document is for sure dated at least on the same day. Definitely not the date after the original document was signed, the ketubah was signed."
Okay.
That to me was a validation that my problem was correct.
Interesting. So you still don't have a solution, but the problem's
No, I
present.
still no. In other words, there's a cognizant understanding that yes, it's kind of silly that we have this text, right?
Right.
So at least make sure that if you were to stack the text in timeline order, small text comes before big text because it makes no sense to have it the other way. Even
Interesting.
though in today's way that we do weddings, big text is signed in the morning and small text is done in the evening.
Interesting.
Right? Now,
Interesting.
if you want to go into the mysticism behind it, I'm sure, and I don't know this, and I know that I know that I don't know, which is part of why I have all these books, is to remind me that I know that there is a tradition. It's very important to have the smaller text. There's a
Right.
Kabbalistic understanding about the layers of how marriage works, and you're fusing two souls, and it's like, imagine it was like a multi-layered puzzle piece. You have to kind of feed in the different pieces to mesh the zipper of the two souls coming together to become one. So this smaller text is part of that mesh, and if you're missing it, then you're going to be one notch off, and everything's going to be a mess, right? Now, I don't know. That's my theory of how it works. I don't understand it. I don't know it. I don't understand. But again, I have enough faith in the system and all the wisdom. I know there's an answer. It's just that I haven't found it yet. And just because I didn't have the time to spend the effort to discover it or to find the right person to ask the question to, doesn't mean the answer isn't out there. It exists. Back to our spiritual, where ideas exist. It exists in the world. There's an answer.
Right.
I'm just not smart enough to have discovered it on my own in the time that I have. So fine, so yet I'll get to the time. I will find it. It will be there, and I'm going to be like, either I'll be like, brilliant. I never could have thought of that myself, or I'll be like, so obvious. Why didn't I think of that 5 years ago? Both. One of those is going to be true.
Oh my God.
All
right, we need to start start to thinking about wrapping up. But before we get there, you have, when I met you, you had, I think, 5 kids. Now you have 7.
Correct.
Soon to be 8.
Soon to be 8.
So you know a thing about parenting, maybe 1 or 2 things. You have a lot of pragmatic experience about parenting. So I want to ask, if you can, walk me through a day in the life, like literally hour by hour. And how because you're doing a lot. You're one of the highest output people I think I know.
I hope so. I wish so.
And you seem to have figured out some sort of way to manage everything, and you put all these pieces in place. So how do you do it? What do you do on a daily basis?
Okay.
How much sleep do you get? When do you eat? When do you wake up, etc.?
Okay, so I'm going to give you blocks of time, and then also with like the mishmash that goes inside.
Perfect.
So we wake up this is on a classical day. Remember, not every day. Okay. A classical day, we'll wake up anytime between our alarms probably start going off 6:15, depending on how much sleep we had the night before. We'll try to be up by 6:45. The goal is to get all the kids up and out of the house so we could be in school by 7:45.
Okay.
It takes about an hour between waking people up and getting the younger kids dressed and lunches made and breakfast served and all that. There's a lot of moving parts. By 7:45-ish, we are at school. I have 2 kids that start school at 7:45. The rest of them are in school by 8 o'clock. So it's all the same location, so it's great. Okay. And then we have morning services. My father has a daily minyan, daily service. I pray there. That starts about 8:15, between 8 and 8:15, depending on how awake I am. Either I am answering people's texts or WhatsApp questions or messages, or I'm just scrolling. I'm scrolling WhatsApp. I'm on like 500 WhatsApp groups. There's always something new and interesting to read. Or I'm going through Twitter. Sometimes, God forbid, before davening, before morning prayers, but sometimes I do that. Sometimes there's emergency things like emails that have to be answered and things like that. There's stuff. So then morning prayers is 8:15 to about 9:15-ish. After morning prayers, I head home. I'll have breakfast sometimes there, sometimes I won't, depending on what's going on. I'll head home. And then from 9:15 until 4:30 is my work block, so to speak, kind of the time that I have. And let me first finish the order of the day, and then I'll go back and fill in those kind of things. Then about 4:30 is when the kids finish school like 3:30, and my wife Mussy is the one who goes and picks up the kids. They come back home about 4:15, 4:20, depending on what they did after school. And then from 4:30 until 7:30, 8 o'clock is kids' time. So we're around, we're doing bedtime, we're doing supper, bedtime. I'll read on the couch, I'll talk to the kids, I'll hang out with them, I'll answer their questions. just spend time with them. Sometimes I'm on my phone, sometimes I'm responding to them. So if they want to do email the older 3 kids have their own emails, they're going to want to do that. There's just stuff. It's a house full of 7 kids, and it's chaos and it's beautiful. It's very loud. It's wonderful. 7:30 is around when bedtime begins. 7:30, 7:45. The youngest one, Avram, goes to sleep at 7. So it's already started. And bedtime goes depending on what's going on. So bedtime can either run for like an hour and a half, between putting kids to sleep and talking to them and sitting with them and reading stories and things like that. But some evenings I have things to do. So if I have things to do, then one of us will do bedtime and one of us will be around for the beginning of bedtime. And then we'll switch out. What happens in the evening? So I'll study with people. I used to schedule people to study with people at 7:30, which is insane. Especially as my kids got older, the older children need more attention, not when the younger kids are around.
Right.
Which is hard to understand because why not? They're all just around. It's different. There's an adult vibe that happens in the evening. And so you need to talk to them and check on their homework if they want, or just chill and ask the questions of the universe and all types of stuff that can happen. No, this is it's great. And then so then sometime between 8 or 8:30 we'll begin my evening, so to speak, my evening hours of working, which usually is at that time it's usually studying with somebody. Sometimes we have an event. So, as part of our Chabad house, some activities we have on average 1 or 2 events. We have 1 event a week on average, if that's besides from class. If we have a class as well, that class will start at 7:45. And then I'll continue that. So sometimes I'll have class at 7:45 that goes till 9 o'clock. 9:15, somebody comes over to study. We'll study for one of these books or some other book or just questions. We'll talk. Sometimes people need to talk, counseling questions. People come to us for all types of stuff. People talk to us anything from dating ideas and help, and people want to talk finances of their own. Just want to have ideas and advice. And Rabbi is a great place. If you don't have this person you can talk to, you should find somebody. This is to anyone listening to this podcast. If you don't have somebody you can talk to and you have questions, whether it's just to be a sounding board in life, if you have a significant other, usually that person can help, but you need to have somebody kind of like a mentor, kind of friend that you can talk to. And I do that for a lot of people. It's just part of what we do, part of who we are. And that will go until the last person leaves. So some nights that's 10, sometimes it's 11. My latest usually goes until 12, something like that. And after the last person leaves is when I have time to do my own studies and that kind of thing. And I'll go to sleep. I'll go to sleep anywhere between 12 and 2, depending on what ended up happening. And then the next morning we're back at it. Now, there's a lot of downtime in that time as well. If somebody's, if class finishes at 9 o'clock and somebody's only coming at 9:30, so I have a half hour I can kill. Either I can nosh on some extra cookies that we have. I can read some more of my WhatsApp. I can go back to social media and waste time there. There's a lot of space in that time.
Right.
It's never usually here's 5 hours of nothing to do, go off and have a good time. But there are here's 10 minutes.
Right.
And then part of what I try to make sure for myself is I don't spend too many of those 10 minutes wasting my time because I have things that need to get done. But in the moment, you're okay, I'm at work. Back to my work hours during the day. So during the day, I have 3 or 4 responsibilities. I study with people. We plan events, we plan activities, we plan programming, we plan, for the Chabad. I have other rabbis that call me for ideas and advice. I call rabbis for ideas and advice. I'll spend time talking to my wife about this kind of stuff. I'll study on my own. I'll record podcasts some afternoons, for example. We'll have, it's a flex time that I can do whatever I want. And I do my meeting. A lot of my meetings, if I can, I'll take them then as well. I prefer to take my meetings during the day, like every person who works. But because I work with people that most of the time are working,
right?
So by definition, like therapists, right? When do therapists work? Therapists work from 5 o'clock or from 4 o'clock, and then till through the evening. So we end up sitting in both time zones.
Interesting. It's
an average day, nothing crazy. And then Shabbat is different, and Friday is different, and Sundays are different. But yeah, you get the general gist.
What's been the most helpful parenting piece of advice that you've ever gotten?
That I've gotten?
That you would give.
That I would give.
Presumably it's the same, but maybe not.
Okay, there's two things. Number one, parenting changes as you get older, as your kids get older. It changes very dramatically. And this is not necessarily important for you yet because you're just on the cusp of the beginning of that. But be very cognizant of the needs of your children and understand that they shift. And they also shift rapidly in the beginning as well, right? A baby from 0 to 6 months, and 6 months to a year to 2 years, their needs change very, very rapidly. Even though, a lot of them in the beginning, you're going to hold them the entire time. But by the time they're 2 years old, they don't want to be held the entire time. And maybe it's not good. The other thing is that education starts right away. The things that you want to teach your children begins with birth. That's when education starts. And sometimes education can be, education is it's not being a friend of your child. That's probably the most simple kind of formulation. You're not being your child's friend. Your job is to be your child's parent, which means you're going to educate them. You're going to tell them gently, teach them how to do things. Sometimes it requires love. Sometimes it requires being firm. Both, you have to be careful. Too much of either one of them ends up in a bad situation. Our Bible tells us, Abraham was all love, and he ended up with a son that was not good.
Right.
And Isaac was all strictness and tough, and he ended up with a son that was not good.
Right.
And Jacob is the one who looked to his father and his grandfather and says we need to have a strong balance. And so it's depending on what parenting book you're reading, depending on what social media influencer you're following, it depends on which friend you most recently spoke to. There's going to be a wind pushing you in a direction.
Right.
More love, more strictness, more firm. I'm going to teach my child how to be a man. I'm going to teach her how to be a woman, how to really kind of do the responsibilities of the life, what it's supposed to be. And at the same time, you have to remember to balance that with love. So, and sometimes love is too much. You can have whatever you want, stay up to whatever time you want. Let's do our seventh countdown of the afternoon. I'll count to 3, and then we're going to go to bed. No, right? It goes the other way as well.
Right.
I told you to go to bed. I told you 3 times, and now I'm going to lift you up, and you may not be happy. In fact, you're going to scream. You may try to hit me. It's okay.
Right.
So there's a balance. There's the difficulty is keeping yourself balanced within the balance of life, because you're going to be tired, you're going to be hungry, you're going to be happy, you're going to be upset, and it's your relationship with your wife, and so you have that as well. There's multi things coming in. And the thing to remind yourself is that you want to be balanced. Right. That's what I think is the kind of the key reminder that I want, and that therefore you're constantly checking yourself, kind of not, and also listening to your wife when she tells you you're being balanced. It's very, 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 very hard to do this. But I would say that's the hardest part of parenting.
Is knowing when you're out of balance?
No, it's listening to your wife. Listen. Your significant other sees the outside of you. And maybe your intentions are good, and maybe the outcome of it is not right, or maybe in the moment you've gotten into this rote of like a certain it's in the moment itself,
right? And
sometimes they're like it's have to be verbal, and you have to remember they're listen to what they're saying. They may be right, they may be wrong. We'll figure it out afterwards if they're right or wrong. But right now, you kind of bring that in right away into the situation.
Right.
Again, a lot of this I'm talking about now is there's a range of ages
for sure.
Children. Yes,
for sure.
With little kids, a lot of it is, there's a lot of it's routine, a lot of it is pragmatic, but the most important things that you want to teach, this goes back to the main point. Education starts at 0. So if you want your child to grow up happy, happy doesn't mean happy that they're always exuberant. Happy means they're satisfied. They have to know there's a purpose. Why are they here? We believe in a God. If you believe in God, you should teach that to your child. Don't let them discover another one.
Right.
If you believe in Judaism, teach it to your child. If you believe in spirituality, teach it to your child. They should kiss the mezuzah before they go to sleep at night. They should give charity every day. They should say the Jews have a tradition to say the bedtime Shema. They should say the bedtime Shema every single night. When they wake up in the morning, they should say good morning. How are you? Thank God we're alive. Basics, and this is to babies that don't talk yet.
Right.
They're not even cognizant of anything. You really begin this kind of bringing them in. It's a very, very, the world can be a scary place.
Right.
We have a tradition, we have a religion that gives us, to our subjective points earlier, gives the best inoculation, the best formula on how to live in this world. Gives us a very, very strong framework. to be a satisfied, productive, purposeful human being. Productive isn't even a word I like. Purposeful.
Yeah.
And so give it to your child immediately. Let them understand they're here for a purpose.
So balance and love. What a beautiful way to end it. What's if people want to get in touch with you or read more about you or learn more about you, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Austin Rabbi on Twitter, X, Austin Rabbi on Instagram. Search highenergyjudaism.com. We're going to work on making that robust. Our tagline is High Energy Judaism, so that's what we believe in strongly.
Amazing.
I'm the Rabbi of Chabad YJP, so YJP Austin on all social media.
Okay. Rabbi Mendy, thank you so much for everything you do, for coming on here, for being who you are in this world. And thank you for being an amazing friend and mentor. I appreciate you.
Jeff, this is beautiful. I love your podcast. You're a great guy.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. All right. We'll see everybody soon. Bye, everybody.